Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the horse trading that is beginning between different political parties, with Benjamin Netanyahu in the driver's seat to become the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history after his Likud party gained 30 seats in Tuesday's snap general election. With us, Daniel Taub, member of the Likud party's Central Committee, also a columnist for the Jerusalem Post. He joins us from Jerusalem. Joining us from here in the studio is Ofer Brunstein, member of the Labour Party and co-president of the International Forum for Peace. Mitchell Plitnick of the Foundation for Middle East Peace is in Washington, and in New York, Michael Cohen with the Century Foundation think tank. Michael, I want to come back to that statement made by the White House press secretary this Wednesday when it comes to repairing relations with Netanyahu after that March 3rd speech before a Republican-led Congress. The White House taking cover most of the time behind the usual spin. Let's take a listen.
President Obama remains committed to working very closely with the winner of the ongoing elections to cement and further deepen the strong relationship between the United States and Israel. And the president is confident that he can do that with whomever the Israeli people choose.
That was Tuesday, Michael Cohen. And then today, that same White House spokesman, Josh Earnest, telling reporters that he was worried about the use of divisive rhetoric in the Israeli election. How does that bode for what's to come in the fence mending that some are expecting between the White House and Netanyahu?
I don't think you're going to see a lot of fence mending in the near term. I think what's happened in the past couple of days is I think it's created a major rift in the U.S.-Israel relationship. You know, Netanyahu saying that he no longer supports the Palestinian state. I mean, this goes against U.S. policy in the region for more than a decade, which supports two states and supports the Palestinian state. And so I don't know how you square that circle necessarily. It is very clear at this point that the U.S. and Israel have very different views on the future of Israel, the future of the Palestinian aspirations for self-determination. And there's no real way to square that in the near term. So I think you will see an eroded relationship. I think you may see resolutions from the Security Council. I think you may see a whole host of measures taken by the U.S. government to put pressure on Israel.
Mitchell Plitnick, you agree?
I do agree. I think where we are in terms of the U.S.-Israel relationship, we're in a very unusual place. And this is not about a personality clash between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is, as Michael said, this is about a real difference in policy and how each country looks at the situations in the region. It's true on Iran. It's true on the Palestinian issue. I think the United States is not prepared to simply sit back and say, okay, well, the two-state solution's dead. I guess there's nothing we're going to be able to do anymore. I think the United States will have to take some sort of action. I think it's possible, as Michael suggested, that there will be a resolution coming out of the Security Council that the U.S. would either participate in or at least not block. I think there might be the presentation of an American plan and an Obama parameters, if you will.
I'm sorry, but Mitchell, do you really see that happening at the? Mitchell, do you really see that happening at the Security Council? Would Obama do that? He's not running for president anymore, but wouldn't that undermine the chances of whoever the standard bearer will be in 2016 for his party?
I don't know how much it will really hurt whoever runs as a Democrat in 16. Almost all of those candidates are going to be distancing themselves very far from Obama, especially on foreign policy. So I don't know how much of an effect it will have there. And I think as well, the Democratic voters, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think that's resonating. I don't think that's going away so fast. So I think Obama may be in a unique position to take some steps that are very, very unusual for an American president. And I definitely think that he recognizes, or he would have to recognize, that the situation in terms of U.S. interests in the region is one that is moving towards crisis. If Israel is really going to refuse a two-state solution and not be willing to discuss a resolution to the conflict on that basis, I think we're looking at a real crisis for U.S. policy in the region, and I think the president would feel the need to do something about that.
Daniel Taub, there was the announcement, you remember, of the building of those settlements while Vice President Biden was in Israel. That annoyed the White House. There was the fact that there was that support for that visit by Mitt Romney just before the 2012 election. And now there's this March 3rd speech that was taken, that was given before a Republican-led Congress. Can we say that at this point Netanyahu doesn't care as much what the White House thinks?
Well, first of all, just to say something about Mitt Romney's visit, every candidate for president, just about every candidate for president visits Israel. Any candidate who's serious. Barack Obama visited Israel when he was running for president. Many of the Republican candidates visited Israel during their primaries. It's really not unusual, and it wasn't a sign of Netanyahu favoring Mitt Romney over Obama. And I don't even believe that Netanyahu thought that Mitt Romney was going to defeat Obama in the elections. Now, with regard to the speech regarding Iran, at that issue, I think the Prime Minister knew that it might perturb Obama. I don't think he thought it would annoy him as much as Obama said it did eventually. As you saw in the speech, he expressed a lot of appreciation for the president. But the real issue is that for us is that our existence could be in danger if Iran achieves nuclear weapons capabilities. So he really felt that he had no choice.
Ofer Bronstein.
But if I could just also say,
Ofer Bronstein, go ahead.
You know, I would like to remind you something about how serious American can be or should be on the Middle East and the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I would like to remember one part of the Netanyahu speech in the Congress. When he said how much he appreciates the help of President Obama when it was a big fire in the north of Israel a few years ago. He called President Obama to ask for assistance, and President Obama gave him the assistance to take care of a fire in the north of Israel. Does the Israeli understand that to really deal with the issue of security of Israel in the region, they will always need the American? If they need them for a fire in the north of Israel, they won't need it. They won't need the American administration, the American president when it came to Iran, when it came to the Palestinian issue, when it came to all the terrorist organization in the Middle East. How long we are going, Mr. Netanyahu is going to lose his humility and spit in the face of the American president? And how long, and this is to my American friend I'm asking, how long the American administration will have double standard? How long they are going to put a veto on any resolution that concern Israel and Palestinian issue? It's time for the American. It's time for the American not to have any more double standard to mean business. We need it for Israel. We need it for the security of Israel. We need it for the region. We need it to meet international law and international standard. Only the solution of a two-state solution, it's a viable one. If no, we are going to go, as Mr. Bennett, who is going to be part of the next government and was part of the last government, into an apartheid solution. It's not good for Israel. As an Israeli and as a Jew, I'm shameful of it. I'm very in pain for it. Israel don't deserve it.
You're very ashamed of your country, we know.
Yes, I'm ashamed of a minister in my government, in my country, who is calling for apartheid. I'm ashamed when ministers in my government are being racist towards the Arab citizens of Israel. Absolutely, I'm ashamed. Because I love Israel and because I believe that Israel deserves better, I'm fighting this kind of symptom, of this kind of disease that is growing in the body of Israel.
There's democracy in the Palestinian Authority? Because if we create a Palestinian state, there probably will never be an election there again. Or maybe there'll be one more and then never again. There haven't been elections there.
Let me remind you something. Let's not be...
so how much do you really care about Palestinians? You want them to be terrorized by Hamas?
Let's be honest.
That's what you want for them.
Let me tell you something.
That's what you want for us.
Do you know, first of all, let me remind you a few facts. Mr. Netanyahu made a deal with Yasser Arafat, not Abu Mazen.
Facts like Sheldon Adelson
Let me
is Mr.
finish my
Netanyahu's
sentence.
boss?
Let me remind you a few facts. Mr. Netanyahu made a deal with Yasser Arafat on the Wye River Agreement, calling for withdrawal of Israel from Hebron, not a small settlements. That's the first thing. Mr. Netanyahu met many times President Abbas and had some deal and agreement with him. And let me remind you, this is the most important one. When you speak about terrorism and you try to implant fear in the heart of people, the people who are guaranteeing the security of Israel.
Is this not happening? Am I imagining these terror attacks?
The people who are guaranteeing the security of Israel today is the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. Without the commitment of the Palestinian Authority to fight terrorism and to cooperate with the Israeli forces on a daily basis, the security of Israel will be jeopardized. So let's help Mr. Abu Mazen.
Yes, but
let's help Mr. Abu Mazen to help us to fight terrorism. Without him, it won't happen. And the best partner for peace we have today, it's Mr. Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority. It's not Hamas in the West Bank. It's not terrorism in the West Bank. It's a Palestinian Authority who is committed to fight terrorism. And they're helping the Israeli service and the Israeli security on a daily basis. So let's be serious. Even our best partner, we are trying to undermine. And one more thing that I want to remind you about the Hamas. The only prime minister of Israel who negotiated with the Hamas and released over 1,000 prisoners to the Hamas was Mr. Netanyahu. Let's not forget these facts.
All right. Daniel Taub, briefly, and then I want to turn to our panelists in New York.
I just, there's just so many things and so much yelling, it's just, I feel like it's not even worth it to respond. But Israel does not have to prove that it wants peace. We've proven time and again. We've been engaged, people have said here a number of times that we're refusing to negotiate. We've been engaged in negotiations. We froze settlements for negotiations. We pulled out of Gaza. We uprooted almost 10,000 Jewish citizens from their homes. If you remember during the settlement freeze, the Palestinian Authority only agreed to negotiate in the last month, just to basically show that they were interested, but it was a pretty thinly veiled attempt. We had negotiations again, and even Tzipi Livni, who was part of the Labour Party this election, said that they basically blew up the negotiations. I mean, how much do we have to prove? It's kind of irrelevant having these arguments about Palestinian statehood when the other side isn't willing to negotiate at all, and when you have terrorists doing whatever they want, despite whatever efforts Mr. Abbas is making.
All right, let me bring in on this point Michael Cohen. Listening to the discussion that we're having here, are we now headed for 4 more years where we're not going to get any closer to converting the try, if you will, that began with the Oslo Accords?
I think that we can formally declare the peace process that sort of began in Oslo, I suppose you could say, as being dead. There is, I think, no hope of negotiation. And I mean, contrary to what Daniel Taub has said here, I don't think anybody, maybe him or others in the Likud party, believe that this prime minister is serious about peace, because he clearly is not. I said it 2 days ago, actually. The reality is that the Palestinians, I think somewhat, while they have plenty of their own political problems, have no reason to trust Netanyahu. And I mean, he basically has indicated, that he's uninterested in creating a Palestinian state, and he has put roadblocks and obstacles in front of any kind of negotiated positive outcome for years now. So I think the reality is that we're going to see nothing happen on the peace process, and I think where this is going to shift to is the international arena. There's the Palestinians, with support from the EU and some, perhaps even in the U.S., putting more pressure on Israel, delegitimizing Israel, trying to sanction Israel. And I think, this creates a terrible situation for Israel. I think in a sense that, they're back against the wall moving forward. There's not going to be a negotiated peace anytime soon. And I think rather than have a negotiated peace that could protect Israel's interests, Israel's going to find itself fighting rearguard battles to hold off the Palestinians' international efforts to isolate them. And meanwhile, anybody who believes the status quo in the West Bank is maintainable, I think is kidding themselves. Ofer made a good point. The security cooperation is a huge part of the reason why terrorism incidents have gone down. How long will that cooperation continue? As long as Netanyahu was saying, he doesn't support a Palestinian state. At what point does the Palestinian Authority say they're going to dissolve the Palestinian Authority because there's no point in continuing this process and forcing Israel to pay for their own occupation? I think that what I'm hearing here from Daniel and what I heard from Netanyahu is sort of whistling past the graveyard. This idea that the status quo that it currently exists can be maintained. It can be maintained until it cannot. And when it cannot, I think Israel is going to pay a major price for that.
All right, a couple of points I want to bring up before we go. The first one is there was one difference that in this election, and it was the makeup now of the opposition, a coalition between the Labour Party and Kadima, but also this banding together, which is unprecedented, of Arab parties of various stripes, be they communist, nationalist, or even some Islamist. Mitchell Plitnick, Arab citizens in Israel, they make up 20% of the population. They're now going to have 14 seats in the next Knesset. What will that change?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change very much. This coalition was brought together really out of need. All of the parties involved were worried that they might not make the necessary threshold to stay in the Knesset after this election. So they came together, and actually in coming together, they managed not only to stay in the Knesset, but actually increase the number of seats collectively that they have. I think that's a dramatic victory, and it sends a strong message, but the politics haven't really changed. No Israeli government has ever included Arab parties.
Yes, no.
There is a strong resistance against that. A lot of the parties are very ideologically opposed. In fact, most of the parties are ideologically opposed to it. And as a result, also, the votes count in the Knesset. That certainly is meaningful, the fact that they have several more. But beyond that, in the short term, I don't think it has much of an effect. In the long term, I think this could really be very impactful, because if Moshe Kahlon of the Kulanu Party wanted to really seriously consider joining with the Zionist Union and trying to put a coalition together where Isaac Herzog was going to be prime minister, then they would still need the joint list to form a strong coalition, probably form any coalition. That is not realistic right now, but I think it's a message to the opposition that Labour and Yesh Atid and other centrist and center-left parties need to find a way to include the Arab parties in what they're doing, because right now they're working at a terrible disadvantage vis-a-vis the right. The right can pick and choose through all of the so-called right-wing or religious parties, whereas the center and center-left is immediately eliminating, anywhere between 12 and 15 seats of potential coalition partners.
24 hours ago at this time, Ofer Brunstein, we had a supporter of the Zionist Union, that opposition coalition between Labour and Kadima.
Not Kadima.
Not Kadima, excuse me, the centrists. Telling us that for now it was definitely not in the cards, any alliance between Zionist Union and those Arab parties. How do you see the future?
Let me remind you first that when Labour Party was into coalition, led by Amir Peretz, was into coalition of Mr. Olmert as Prime Minister for the first time in the history of Israel, we had an Arab-Israeli citizen Minister of Culture.
That was then, this is now, though.
Yeah. And I'm very proud, not just to rectify that an Arab was already minister in Israel and part of the government. It's true that no Arab party were ever member of a coalition. But it's true as well that in 1992, when Rabin created his coalition, the one who brought us to peace, with right-wing party, with religious party like Shas, it was supported from outside by the Arab parties. As my friend just said, the Arab party had to unify for technical reason, because the law changed in Israel, and that to unify.
But do you agree with Mitchell Plitnick that, for now at least, those 14 seats don't matter?
First of all, they won't matter to Mr. Netanyahu, because he's going to rule without them and without their help. But what is important, I'm not sure that this Arab coalition is going to stand for a long time, because it's a combination of parties which some of them don't have nothing to do one with each other. They did it for technical, strategic, tactic reason, but I don't think that deep inside it's many things that glue them together. But I do believe that it's time, as it was once. Let me remind you, the Labour Party for many, many years had a very strong Arab support. We don't have it anymore. It's time now for the left, for the progressists in Israel, to create a party where Arab and Jews can together fight for the future of their country. And let me remind you, Israel is not only the country of the Jews, it's the country of all its citizens. And we have 20% of the citizens of the State of Israel who are Muslim and Christian, and they are Arabs and Druze and Cherkess and Bedouin, and they are members of my country as any other citizens. And I'm outraged of the campaign that some of the leaders of the right and right wing did. I'm outraged of the declaration of Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday at election days, putting fear in the heart of people, telling them, urging them, go vote massively. The Arabs with the labor and the American money are taking buses to vote. Like if the Arab Israeli citizen were a danger to the State of Israel. They are member of my country as me. And it's time for us to create a big party where everybody can find his place as equal citizen of the State of Israel. This is the State of Israel where I want to live.
All right, Daniel Tauber, can we conclude by saying that Israel belongs to all of its citizens?
I think Israel is a country of all citizens, but I think what he was forgetting to say was that, first of all, the Labour Party has criticized many politicians in these Arab parties for their, in the least divisive statements, sympathizing with terror. And I think and these parties themselves have refused to join coalitions, and it was not at all clear that even if Isaac Herzog had earned more seats than Likud, that the Arab parties would have supported him. But I think what the Prime Minister meant was that there are parties in the Knesset who don't believe Israel should be a Jewish state in terms of its character, not in terms of who has rights and who doesn't have rights. The Prime Minister believes that Arab citizens have rights, and he said as much after that statement. What he meant was that if parties that don't believe that Israel is a Jewish state are going to get a large share of the Knesset, people need to wake up who disagree with them and also go out and vote.
All right, I want to thank you, Daniel Tauber. That'll be the final word for now. Ofer Brunstein, I want to thank you. I want to thank Mitchell Plitnick for being with us from Washington, and Michael Cohen in New York City. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment is next here. And joining us now for Media Watch is James Creedon. Of course, the other big story of the day, that attack on a busload of tourists who had come off a cruise liner ship at the famous Bardo Museum in Tunis, adjacent to Tunisia's parliament.
That's right, Francois, and as you can imagine, a lot of reaction from Tunisians and around the world as well on social media. I'll just show you a couple of texts first on Twitter expressing support and condolences. Tunisia was long an oasis of peace in the Middle East, says Stephen Greenhouse. Today's massacre of 19 people in Tunis is shocking and shattering. Similar sentiments from Mustafa Akyal. I have great sympathy for Tunisia, the freest country of the Muslim world. Condolences for its losses today at the hands of vile terrorists. Now, you also have images expressing similar sentiments. Francois, O country of Jasmine, says this text here, superimposed on an Instagram photo. When will your suffering end? So from pathos to political, I suppose, observations as well. And this is a Tunisian flag. You can see a skull there coming across, I suppose, symbolizing the death and destruction. This wasn't the eclipse predicted for the day after tomorrow. I suppose the death that this attack caused, eclipsing the Tunisian democracy, etc. Now, you also saw spontaneous displays of support cropping up, Francois, on front of the site of the attack. You can see people gathering there on front of Bardo Museum to condemn the terrorist attack. This is another photo from the same scene. So people spontaneously in the city of Tunis heading towards the site of the attack.
Our correspondent describing the clapping for the police who went in there, one of them getting killed in the shootout there.
That's right. So support for the security services who were involved in that. And also you can see this text here, which has been translated above. Now that is somebody carrying a sign draped in the Tunisian flag saying, "No to the human rights of terrorists." And of course, the people responsible for that attack were indeed killed on the site. So I think a lot of anger is well directed at those who were responsible for the shooting. This is also another image on Instagram from the same scene. And so lots online about that. Also, of course, the slogans appearing on social media: pray for Tunisia. That is the Tunisian flag, normally in red, and here, I suppose, in black for to depict the mourning that is currently taking place. Je suis Bardo, that je suis meme, which you've been seeing since the Paris attacks, of course, coming back again and again, people expressing solidarity. I am Bardo, with the site of the attack here. This is one of the artworks in the museum, and you can see there somebody, this is the cartoonist Baudry rather, with a slightly macabre take on that particular drawing. This one, I think, is perhaps an appropriate one to close the social media drawings, etc. That is actually a Tunisian proverb in French. Cruelty is the strength of cowards, says this particular drawing, and I think it's underneath then as well. I am Tunisian. So I think a lot of anger and upset being expressed on social media, Francois, and obviously politicians as well have been getting their say in. You had François Hollande taking to Twitter to express his the solidarity of France with Tunisia in light of these attacks.
All right, and drawing the comparison with Paris, with Copenhagen,
indeed,
and other places. James Creedon, many thanks.
Thanks,
It's, of course, a story we're going to continue to follow. I want to thank all our panelists from the France 24 debate. Stay with us. There's much more to come.